party was in full swing, laughter and music reverberating off the walls of the elegantly decorated hall. Guests clinked glasses and exchanged pleasantries, the buzz of conversations masking the undercurrent of tension brewing inside me. I stood by the bar, gripping my glass of whiskey, my eyes fixed on the far side of the room. And then I saw her. She emerged from a dimly lit hallway, her hand smoothing the hem of her skirt as she stepped back into the bustling crowd. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly out of place, and a telltale smudge of lipstick on her chin. She paused briefly, scanned the room, and plastered on a wide smile as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. Behind her, seconds later, another figure appeared. Him. The man she thought I hadn't noticed. The coworker who lingered too long in conversations, laughed too loudly at her jokes, and, tonight, had followed her into that room. His tie was crooked, his expression smug as he tucked his phone into his pocket and disappeared into the crowd. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I remained rooted in place, forcing calm into every fiber of my being. Anger clawed at my chest, the betrayal sharper than ever, but I clenched my jaw and swallowed it down. No, tonight wasn't the time for an outburst. This wasn't going to be a scene. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, feeling the crisp edges of the envelope I'd carried with me all evening. Inside was everything she'd taken for granted: years of love, trust, and commitment, reduced to a cold, impersonal document that would sever our bond once and for all. This wasn't the first time I'd caught her in lies. The late nights, the hushed phone calls, the growing distance, they all pointed to one undeniable truth. But tonight, seeing her walk out of that room with him, I knew there was no salvaging what we once had. I took a deep breath, drained the last of my drink, and steadied myself. The envelope in my pocket felt heavier now, but its weight only strengthened my resolve. Tonight, she'd realized she could no longer play me for a fool. We weren't always like this. There was a time when I thought we were the perfect couple. I still remember the first time I saw her. Bright, confident, and full of life. She had this way of lighting up a room, drawing people toward her without even trying. I was no exception. We met at a mutual friend's party, and by the end of the night, I was completely captivated. Our romance was everything I'd dreamed of. We were inseparable, sharing dreams of the future and planning a life together. Felt effortless. We moved in sync, finishing each other's sentences and supporting each other through every hurdle. She had ambition, and I admired that about her. She often said we made the perfect team, and for years I believed her. The early years of our marriage were blissful. We built a home, traveled, and dreamed of growing our family one day. But somewhere along the way, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Her job became more demanding, her nights out with coworkers more frequent. I dismissed it as part of her career growth. She was climbing the corporate ladder, and I was proud of her. But the cracks began to show. She started coming home later, always with an excuse: team bonding, a last-minute client dinner, or networking opportunities. The woman who used to confide in me about everything now seemed distant, guarded. I chalked it up to stress, tried to be patient, and waited for her to come back to me. But then there was him. At first, I didn't notice him. Just another coworker, someone she mentioned casually in conversations about work. But his name began cropping up more often. He sent her texts late at night, ones she'd quickly dismiss with a laugh when I asked. Just a work thing, she'd say, brushing it off as if it didn't matter. I wanted to believe her, to trust her like I always had. But her smile seemed less genuine, her touch less frequent, and her words lacked the warmth they once carried. Looking back, the signs were all there, but I didn't want to see them. I was too busy holding on to the woman I thought she was, blind to the one she'd become. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, a voice I tried to silence with logic and trust. But the whispers grew louder as the weeks turned into months. There were too many unexplained absences, too many work emergencies, and too many nights where her phone was glued to her hand. The screen dimmed as if she didn't want me to see. I told myself I was overthinking, that she'd never betray me. But doubt has a way of digging in, clawing at your peace of mind until you can't ignore it anymore. It was late one evening when the first real crack appeared. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, smiling at something on the screen. I asked what was so funny. She glanced up, startled, and quickly locked her phone. "Oh, nothing," she said, brushing it off. My stomach churned, but I forced a smile and let it go. The following week, I noticed she was more guarded. Her phone never left her side, not even when she went to the bathroom. She started keeping it on silent, claiming it was to avoid distractions. At night, she'd turn it face down on the nightstand, something she'd never done before. I began noticing patterns. The texts always came at odd hours, usually when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her late nights at work started aligning suspiciously with days she'd mention him. Her coworker, who'd been such a great help with the new project, I decided to trust my gut and look deeper. I started small, scrolling through our shared calendar and cross-referencing her work events. Some didn't match up. Then, one night while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. My hands trembled as I swiped to her messages. Most were normal, the kind you'd expect between colleagues. But then I found the hidden chat, stored under a generic name. What I read left me breathless. Flirty exchanges, inside jokes, and suggestive remarks that left little to the imagination. It wasn't explicit enough to confront her outright, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. I spent the next few days piecing it all together, watching her, listening. The final blow came when I overheard a phone call. Her hushed voice, the laugh she used to reserve for me, and a promise to meet him at the company party. That was it. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt everything at once. Heartbreak, anger, disbelief. Part of me wanted to confront her then and there, to demand answers and make her face what she'd done. But another part of me knew I had to wait to make this count. The company party would be the perfect stage. I would let her write her own confession, and then I'd make my move. When the company party invitation arrived, I knew it would be the perfect opportunity. She didn't even hesitate before mentioning him, casually adding that he'd probably be there. Her excitement about the event, one she'd barely cared about in previous years, was telling enough. I played along, hiding my emotions behind a practiced smile. Every detail of that night was carefully planned in my mind. The party would be public, neutral ground where she wouldn't expect a confrontation. If she wanted to play games, this was where I would end it, decisively and without causing a scene. The night of the event, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, rehearsing my calm exterior. The envelope containing the separation letter was tucked neatly into my jacket pocket, a constant reminder of my purpose. As we left the house together, she was radiant, dressed to impress in a sleek dress that hugged her figure. To anyone else, she might have looked like the perfect wife. To me, she was a stranger. The venue was buzzing when we arrived, soft jazz playing in the background, the hum of voices filling the air. I could see her scan the room as soon as we walked in, her eyes lighting up when they landed on him. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to break. I spent the next hour watching her. She was a master of appearances, chatting with colleagues, laughing at jokes, all while sneaking glances at him. He wasn't subtle either, positioning himself just close enough to catch her eye, their unspoken connection obvious to anyone paying attention. Then came the moment I'd been expecting. She leaned in, whispered something in my ear about needing to find the restroom, and disappeared into the crowd. I waited a few minutes before casually making my way to the back of the room, scanning the hallways. It didn't take long to spot her slipping into a side room, him following close behind. My heart pounded as I watched the door close behind them. The pain of her betrayal was sharper than ever, but I swallowed it down, steadying my breath. This wasn't the time for anger. Tonight wasn't about revenge in the form of yelling or drama. It was about reclaiming my dignity and closing this chapter of my life. I returned to the party, blending back into the crowd. When she emerged minutes later, adjusting her skirt and smoothing her hair, it was all I could do to stay composed. She walked toward me, her face a picture of calm, her smile the same practiced lie I'd seen too many times before. My hand brushed the envelope in my pocket, its weight grounding me. Tonight was the night I would set myself free. She walked back into the room like nothing had happened, her head held high, a practiced smile on her lips. Her hands smoothed her skirt one last time before she grabbed a glass of wine from a passing server. She slipped seamlessly into a conversation with a group of her coworkers, laughing lightly, as if she hadn't just shattered every ounce of trust I'd ever placed in her. From across the room, I watched her, a storm of emotions churning inside me. My heart ached with the weight of betrayal, but it was matched by a simmering anger and a steely resolve. I reminded myself why I was here, to end this on my terms, not hers. I made my way toward her, weaving through the crowd of laughing, oblivious partygoers. Each step felt heavier than the last, but the envelope in my pocket gave me strength. She saw me approaching and smiled, her eyes betraying none of the guilt I'd hoped to see. "There you are," she said, her tone breezy. "I was starting to think you'd abandoned me." Abandoned her? The irony of her words was almost laughable. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even speak. I simply reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, holding it out to her. Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face as she took it. "What's this?" "Open it," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the chaos inside me. She hesitated, glancing around as though searching for someone to save her from this moment. Slowly, she peeled the envelope open, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the document inside. Her eyes scanned the words, and I saw the exact moment the truth hit her. Her face drained of color, her carefully crafted composure cracking in an instant. This can't be serious," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're leaving me?" Her words hung in the air, drawing the attention of a few nearby colleagues. The growing tension made her panic, and she quickly lowered her voice. "We can talk about this at home," she pleaded, her eyes darting around the room. "Not here. Please." But I wasn't interested in sparing her dignity. Not after everything she'd done. "Home," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "You left that behind the moment you stepped into that room with him." Her eyes widened, tears welling up as she shook her head. "It's not what you think. I can explain." "You don't need to," I interrupted, cutting her off with a cold finality. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of him, her lover, standing near the exit. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, his face flushed with embarrassment as he avoided my gaze. He didn't say a word, didn't even try to defend her. Coward. I turned my attention back to her. "I've given you enough chances," I said quietly. "But you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Before she could respond, I stepped back, taking one last look at the woman I once loved. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with the letter in her trembling hands and the weight of her betrayal crashing down around her. As I exited the party, the cold night air hit me like a jolt of reality. For the first time in months, I felt lighter, free. The days following the party were a blur of messages, calls, and tearful attempts at reconciliation, on her part at least. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from her. Apologies, explanations, promises that it would never happen again. I didn't respond. Her voicemails were a mix of desperation and deflection. "It was a mistake," she pleaded in one. "It didn't mean anything. We can fix this." In another, her tone shifted to anger. "You're overreacting. We've been through too much to end it like this." But I remained silent. There was nothing left to say. Word of what happened at the party spread quickly. The scene hadn't been loud or dramatic, but it didn't need to be. Enough people had seen her reaction, seen her holding the letter with trembling hands, for the rumors to take root. Whispers followed her at work, colleagues giving her sidelong glances. Her lover wasn't spared either, his reputation tarnished as the truth surfaced. Some of our mutual friends reached out, torn between taking sides. A few tried to mediate, suggesting I hear her out, but most expressed shock and disappointment in her. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had noticed her growing closeness with him. They just hadn't wanted to say anything. For her, the fallout was swift and unrelenting. The polished image she'd worked so hard to maintain crumbled. Professionally, her credibility was questioned. Socially, she became the subject of hushed conversations and judgmental stares. As for me, I felt free. The pain of betrayal lingered, but it was dulled by a sense of relief. I no longer had to wonder, to doubt, or to carry the burden of a love that wasn't returned. The weight I'd been carrying for months, maybe years, was finally gone. I started focusing on myself for the first time in a long time. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, and began to rediscover who I was outside of the marriage. As for her and him, I heard through the grapevine that their fling didn't last long. Whatever illusion of romance they'd built fell apart under the pressure of judgment and regret. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled it. Silence was my weapon and dignity my shield. In the end, I chose myself over the wreckage she left behind, and that was the most satisfying revenge of all. Sitting in my new apartment, I found myself staring out the window at the city lights, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, they no longer felt as sharp. Instead, there was a strange sense of gratitude. Not for what she did, but for the clarity it brought. Choosing self-respect over suffering wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For months, I'd been holding on to a marriage that no longer existed, hoping to fix something that was beyond repair. Letting go felt like stepping off a ledge, but I'd discovered that falling wasn't the end. It was the beginning of learning to fly. I started rebuilding my life, piece by piece. I've reconnected with old friends who remind me of the person I used to be. I found joy in the small things again. Reading a good book, going for a long run, or simply enjoying a quiet evening without tension hanging in the air. The journey forward won't be perfect. There are still moments of sadness, of wondering what went wrong. But now, those moments don't define me. I've realized that trust and loyalty are gifts, not guarantees, and they should only be given to those who deserve them. To anyone who's been where I was, I'll say this: your worth isn't defined by someone else's inability to see it. Don't let betrayal make you bitter. Let it make you better. What would you do if faced with the same choice? Would you hold on, or would you let go and choose yourself? It's a question worth asking, because in the end, the only person who can truly betray you is the one staring back in the mirror if you settle for less than you deserve. And that's my story. A journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and rediscovering my self-worth. If you enjoyed the story or found it relatable, make sure to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Unheard Stories, where we share gripping tales of love, betrayal, and redemption every week. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more stories to life. Who knows? The next story might even be yours.